April 27th, 1999, interviewing Florene Herndon. My name is Utah Reuter, and camera operator is Susan Acuna. Mrs. Herndon, would you mind telling me a little bit about where and when you were born, and maybe your parents' names?
I was born January 10th, 1918, on a farm about 6 miles east of Tuscola and Ovalla. And my father's name was Alva Willis Wilkinson, and my mother's name was Maggie Ola Floyd Wilkinson. And I grew up there. I lived there all my life except 3 years. I started school in Arizona, but we were out there 3 years, and then we came back to our homestead. My great-grandfather moved here when my father was quite young, and homesteaded a bunch of land, and his family stayed there.
And what caused you to go out to Arizona?
Well, I had some relatives out there, and for some reason we went out there and stayed 3 years. My aunt was out there, and I don't really know how come we went, because I started school there when I was 5 years old. And then we came back to Texas, and I was in the 2nd grade, and Dad had to pay for me to go to school in Texas in the 2nd grade. But I went to school. There was a little school, do you need to know that? Little school down there on the highway. It was a mile and a half west of our house, and it was named Oak Lawn. And I went there till I was in the 7th grade, and then they consolidated with the Ovalla School, and I graduated in 1934 from Ovalla High School.
What was your school day like? When you were a child? Did you have chores? Did you have a lot of homework?
Oh yes, we had chores. We had homework, and of course I grew up. I was during the Depression, and things were really tough there for a while, but everybody else had the same problem, so we all lived through it. And then after I grew up, I went to Drones Business College in Abilene, and then when I got out there, I went to work.
Was it unusual for a young woman your age to go straight to work, or was it pretty much common?
Well, a lot of them did, and my daddy was always, he had the idea that all girls need to be prepared, that they need to know how to make a living, and he encouraged education, and he encouraged us to do those things. And I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. There's 3 of us right together, and I was the middle one. And then I had a brother when I was 13 and a sister when I was 19.
Wow.
So we were a big and close family.
What were some of your family traditions?
Well, I don't really know. My father's folks, they all, you mean what my father said, they were farmers, and my grandfather was, my mother's father was too, and so I don't really know what. Daddy was on the school board, and he always encouraged us in our education. He wanted us all to get an education. And
you grew all of your own food on the farm?
Yes, we had chickens, and Daddy had a hatchery, a big hatchery, and we had eggs. We'd take crates of eggs, these big crates of eggs to Abilene, and then we'd have broilers, and he had little houses all over the things, and he'd sell the broilers and sell the eggs, and then he hatched little chickens for a long time, and then lightened one night and burned the house that he had all this stuff in, burned, and we had no telling how many cases of boiled egg, I mean, cooked eggs. But after that, he didn't have the little chickens anymore, and then he just sort of had cattle and farming after that. But we couldn't afford to go to college, and so we all went to business. My sister and brother, we were right together, and we all went to business school. And then, of course, I was not at home much when my younger brother and sister were there, because they were so much younger.
Was it a lot cheaper to go to business school than it was to go to a regular college?
Yes, it was.
And it was what, 1 year?
Well, it wasn't any specific time. It was just when you got through with the course. And so I took shorthand and typing, and well, I guess my brother did too. And I've forgotten what I guess my sister did. I don't know. But anyhow, we all went, not at the same time, but we all went and learned how to do something to make a living. And so I did.
How old were you during the Depression? And
I graduated from high school in 1934, and it was beginning to get a little bit better. But I was 16 in January, and I graduated in May. But for the next year, I didn't go to school because we couldn't afford it. And then I went to business school, and later my brother did, though he was older than I was a little bit, 18 months, and my sister was 2 years younger. But my younger brother and sister were a lot, they were a lot younger, and so.
What stands out in your mind as a child? What are some of your fondest memories?
My fondest memories? Well, I always had cats and dogs, and I had a little a cat cemetery up on the hill, and whenever one of my cats died, I would bury those cats up there, and I was the one that was the fondest of the cats, and I always enjoyed that. And then we had for a while, there was part of this building that he used for a hatchery. There wasn't anything in it. We had that for a skating rink. So we had our own private little skating rink. We weren't close enough to town to go to the movie much, and we didn't really have the money. But we had that for a skating rink, and then we were in all the school activities, and then we had cousins that we played with and visited on Sundays, and they'd come to visit us. And so it was, a pretty busy time.
What other kinds of things did you do for entertainment or recreation besides family gatherings?
Well, I don't know. We had our school things, and then we had our friends that would come and spend the night with us, and we'd go spend the night with them, and then we'd go to church, and I guess that's about all I can think of right off.
Did you, when did you start dating? Or did you?
Oh, I started dating. I guess I was a senior in high school because I was younger than any of the rest of the kids, because I started school in Arizona a year before anybody else did, and I was not large to my age, and my daddy was pretty strict, and so I guess I was a junior or a senior before I started dating.
What were the typical dates like in those days?
Well, sometimes we'd go to the Paramount, but not very often because we didn't have that much money. And then we'd go to school functions, and then people would have some parties. And I guess that was about it.
And When did you start at Camp Barkley?
Well, I worked at several places in Abilene, but I worked for Banner Creamery a long time as secretary. And uh, my husband went to Drawings Business College too, but I didn't really know him there. But he worked at Banner Creamery, and we got married in 1939. And I worked there a while, and then I went. I guess I went to work at Camp Barkley. But no, I didn't go straight to work. I worked for the contractor when they built the Medical Replacement Training Center, when they were building it. And then I worked for the contractor. There was a little airfield across the road from, I've forgotten what it was called, Abilene Airfield or something. It was, and I worked for the contractor when he was building that. It was something in conjunction with Camp Barkley, but it wasn't a big thing. And then when they got the hospital finished, well, I went to work at the hospital as a secretary at the hospital. But I had worked in Abilene, several years there. But I worked on the ward there at the hospital. My first job was on the officers' ward. I was the secretary, and I would go with the doctors when they make their rounds. And for my desk or office, I had a little folding chair and a little table with a typewriter on it, and that was it. And used to, a long time, you don't remember it, but we'd clean our typewriters when they got dirty they had a cleaning solutions. Well, during the war, you couldn't get those cleaning solutions, so we had to clean it with ether. And I like to never got used to that. I nearly passed out. But I was working for the contractor for the Medical Replacement Training Center when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor.
What went through your mind at that time?
I beg your pardon?
What went through your mind when that
Lance.
happened?
Well, it was on a Sunday when it happened. I mean, everybody was just amazed. And I know I had written down, when President Roosevelt made this speech, I had written all that down in shorthand. And I had that for a long time. Some way it got lost, I don't know. But nobody could believe it, It was just unbelievable. And it was pretty much of a turmoil, as you can imagine.
So you knew we were headed toward a war?
I beg your pardon?
You knew we were headed toward a war?
Yes, we knew we were. And, of course, Camp Barkley had been there a while, but they had brought in some more, Of course, the first was the 45th Division, and they were in their tents and all. But then and then the 90th, I can't remember when the 90th came in, but their headquarters was not far from the hospital. But after I worked on the ward for a long time, and then the lady who worked for the chief of medical service moved. I guess she went with her husband. That's what usually happened to all the wartime people. But anyhow, I went to work for the secretary of the chief of the medical service, and that was Colonel Mitchell. On the ward was Major Sachs. Of course, they were, after they closed the hospital, their rank was great. I'm sure they were more. But anyhow, I think I had told you that his name was S-A-C-H-S, but it wasn't. It was S-A-C-K-S, because I found a copy of some of that stuff I'd given Dr. Williams. I mean, it was, I just run it off on a copy machine. It's not colored or anything. It's just run. So I'd have a record of what I gave him, and I had his name was written down on some of that. I don't know why. Somewhere during the Army stuff, I knew a man that his name was spelled S-A-C-K-S, but Major Sachs was the one that was, when I went to work there, he was such a nice person, and I had not had any medical dictation in school. You know, that there wasn't very many people ever did that. And there was one girl there at the whole hospital that had medical dictation somewhere in Tennessee or somewhere. She worked for the chief of surgery, and but the rest of us, we just had to learn it. So the doctors and the nurses and the medical dictionary I lived with.
Did you have a hard time learning?
Well, yes, you know, we just make up our own symbols because we hadn't had it in school, and but the spelling of the words and all that. But we had a bunch of stuff that helped us, and everybody was so helpful to everybody else during the war. You know, people just sort of come together and do everything they can to help.
Do any of the patients stand out in your mind? In interesting cases? What kind of cases did the doctors see? Illnesses?
They had the wards. Did you know how it was set up out there? Well, they had a ward for each specialty. They had a ward for gastrointestinal, GI, and for psychiatry, and for all the things. They had a ward. That's where you went if you were sick. But I worked on the officers' ward, and I don't care what they had. They came to the officers' ward, and you know, they had the rooms, and I would go with the doctor and take this down in shorthand when he'd make his rounds, and then go back up to my little desk and type it up. And then after I'd been there a good while, I would take their charts, and I could go ask them routine questions, you know, like anything in the family or anything. I could go by myself and ask them those routine questions, and it would help the doctor when he got ready. He didn't have to take as much time. But when I went to work for the chief of medical service, all charts from the medical service came through his office. And when they were discharged, the charts came through his office, and they were reviewed up there. And then there was the chief of surgery, and all surgical patients, they had their own wards, and all of the surgery came through the chief of surgery. And Colonel Polson was the chief of surgery when I was there, and Colonel Mitchell was the chief of medical service.
Who is the most interesting person you met while you were working there?
Well, I don't know. I get, well, the ones I knew best were the ones that I worked for the longest, was Major Sachs and Colonel Mitchell. They, you know, I worked for them longest. But you've met all kinds, everything. And then later, they made it, instead of it being a station hospital, it became a regional hospital, and we got patients in from all over, even from overseas. We get some sometimes, you know, and those were, every case was different, and it was really interesting, most interesting job I ever had, because, but they didn't, didn't any of them stay there a long time, you know. They, but if they had to either be well enough to go back to work or stay at the hospital, there was no in between. So.
Do you remember the POWs? Were the POWs treated at the hospital?
I don't know where they treated them, but what I remember about the POWs was, I remember one day they brought a whole contingent of them over there to get their vaccinations, and all of the girls that worked there, we all lined up to see them. They were young. I imagine they were 18, 19, 20 or something. They were young, and they were all blonde, you know, light-haired, and but we stood there and watched them as they brought them in, and they came up the ramp, and we watched them. Now, they may have had some older ones later, or some, but that was the only time I ever did see them, was when they brought them to get their shots.
About how many were there?
Oh, I don't know. I imagine this 15, 20. I don't really remember. I know they were lined up out there. But there wasn't just 4 or 5. There was a good bunch of them.
Was there a lot of interest in them among the other camp workers?
Well, we just watched them. They were a curiosity to us, and they were well behaved, and they didn't do anything out of the ordinary, and we just looked.
Do you remember how much money you were paid on the job?
Oh, I don't know. I've got some records somewhere where they was, but now it wouldn't be very much. But it were good because it was civil service, and we felt like we were very fortunate to have the jobs.
And you were married in '39, so you were already married when you
Yes, I was already married when I went to work there.
And did you buy a home in Abilene?
No, we just when we got married, we just roomed and boarded. We both worked, and we had at a lady's house, and later we rented a house there. Let's see, I've forgotten what street it was. Over there, it's right off of South 7th, we went back and forth to Camp Barkley in carpools. You couldn't get gasoline. You had gasoline stamps and all these stamps for your sugar in your shoes and all that sort of stuff. And so you had to go in a carpool because there's no way you could get enough that I know about. So I was in a carpool with some of them there that Colonel Mitchell and Major Sachs, and there was a girl from Albany that was in that carpool, and she was trying to get in the Red Cross and go overseas, I think. And I've forgotten what her name was, but she was trying to gain weight, but she was worked there because you had to be at a certain weight or you couldn't go. And she was in that carpool, and I think there's another officer there, but people that I worked with, and we took day about taking our car.
Do you remember the day that I believe it was the 45th marched into Abilene? Were you there for that, or do you remember?
I don't remember that. I just don't remember that. I don't know why I don't. Some things you remember and something. So evidently I must have not seen them. I must have been working or something, because I didn't. I don't remember when they came in.
You don't recall any of the reaction of the townspeople to the troops?
The townspeople were all for them. They were wonderful to the soldiers, and they did everything they could to help. Of course, the soldiers thought they had been put off into a desert and they were going to starve to death because there was nothing for them to do, but the townspeople really tried to make things interested and helped them every way they could. And they were treated really good for soldiers. Some places I think the soldiers weren't treated so well, but as far as I know, Abilene always was nice to them and helped them every way they could.
What are some things that the town did special for the troops?
Well, they had dances for them, and many people would invite them to their homes and invite them out to eat, and try to make them feel like they were a family, and they did a lot of things to entertain them. And so I felt like that Abilene did really well with adjusting to that, because I guess the Camp Barkley was about as big as Abilene.
Bigger.
But it was just off out there in the wilderness, they thought, and there was no trees, and it was hot, and they didn't know anybody, and they had all training to do. So I'm sure for them it was not much fun at first, but a lot of them eventually settled back down in Abilene.
What did your husband do?
He was the office manager at Banner Creamery, and the Banner Creamery furnished milk and everything for the Army, and he was deferred because it was a defense industry. But he did go in 1945 when they were closing the camp down. Well, he went, and then when he did, well, I went to Camp Maxie with him, and then Fort Ord, and so he was gonna go to Japan, but they needed people in the office, and that's what he'd been doing. So they put him out at Fort Ord and stationed him out there, and I went out there.
California?
I beg your-
California?
Yes.
Did you do any socializing with any of the other?
Not very much. Some. I remember we went to, a few things, but the soldiers usually had their own things, and the officers had the officers club, and we went to a few things, but not a lot, because my husband was a civilian, and we just didn't do a whole great bunch of socializing.
What kinds of things did you do then in town for recreation?
Oh, we went to the show, and we went dancing, and we'd go down to the state park dancing, and that's about the main thing.
Did you have any children?
I didn't have any children. My son was born the day he got home from the Army. Or rather, he got home from California at 8 o'clock that night, and they took me to the hospital at 12. I was at my mother's. I had stayed in California until they told me I either have to stay out there till the baby's born or come back home. So I came back home, and Mother and Daddy still lived out there on the farm. And he got there at 8 o'clock, and I said, please don't have to go to the hospital tonight. And at 12 o'clock, well, they took me to Abilene, to Herndon, and my son was born at the next day.
In what year was this?
1946. Yeah, it was 1946.
And is that your only child?
No, I have a daughter. She was born in 1950. I have a son and a daughter, and 2 grandchildren. My son has a son, my daughter has a daughter.
Is there anything else that you could think of that you'd like to add?
No, I can't.
Any memories that stand out in your mind?
No, I don't. Not especially. But when my husband got out of the Army, he said he was not going back to work in an office. So he became a farmer. His family was a farmer, and so we did that. He did that well, he was accountant. Wasn't an accountant really, before and he did some accounting, but mostly he was a farmer.
That's good.
Yeah.
Did what he wanted. Well, that's good. Well, I appreciate you talking with us today. You've been real helpful and given me some valuable information. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.